A desperate decision, Ma Rodriguez stood in front of her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The emerald green dress she had borrowed from her neighbor hung elegantly on her petite frame, transforming her usual work-worn appearance into something that belonged at tonight's charity gala. Her long black hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her grandmother's pearl earrings caught the light as she turned her head nervously. The envelope on her kitchen counter contained the check that would change everything. $50,000. From Daniel Hayes, the billionaire tech mogul who lived 3 houses down from her modest apartment in Brooklyn. The money would cover her brother Carlos's experimental art therapy treatment, the one their insurance company refused to approve, the proposal that changed everything 3 days earlier. Daniel had appeared at her community garden where she worked as a coordinator. She remembered how out of place he looked in his expensive suit among her tomato plants and sunflowers. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his green eyes intense behind designer glasses, and his presence commanded attention even in her small sanctuary of growing things. "Miss Rodriguez, I have a business proposition for you," he had said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had built an empire before turning 30-5. Emma had looked up from the soil she was preparing, dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her brow. "If you're looking for landscaping services, I can recommend someone. I focus on community gardens and therapeutic spaces. I need you to accompany me to the Metropolitan Museum Charity Gala this Saturday, as my date." The words had hung in the air between them like something impossible. Emma had stared at this man who represented everything she had never been part of, wondering if she had misheard him. The reason behind the request, Daniel had explained his situation with the careful precision of a businessman presenting a proposal. His ex-fiancée Natasha Pemberton would be at the gala, and he needed to appear successful, and moved on from their very public breakup 2 years earlier. The breakup that had been splashed across every society page in the city when Natasha had chosen Benjamin Cross, a real estate mogul with deeper pockets and older family connections. "Why me?" Emma had asked, gesturing to her simple work clothes and calloused hands. "Because you're real," Daniel had replied, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. "Because you create things that matter. Because you won't expect anything from me beyond our agreement." The words had stung more than Emma cared to admit. She understood what he meant, even if he hadn't said it directly. She was safe because she knew her place, because she wouldn't mistake a business arrangement for something more meaningful. A brother's dream now. Standing in her small apartment, Emma thought about Carlos in the next room. Her 23-year-old brother had been born with a rare neurological condition that affected his motor skills and caused chronic pain. Despite his challenges, he was a gifted artist whose paintings captured emotions that words couldn't express. The experimental therapy could help him gain better control over his movements. Maybe even allow him to attend art school like he had always dreamed. Carlos appeared in her doorway, leaning against the frame for support. His thin frame was dressed in his best shirt, and his dark eyes sparkled with mischief. "You look like a princess, Emma, but a nervous princess. I feel like I'm about to walk into a world where I don't belong. Maybe that world needs someone like you in it," Carlos said with the wisdom that often surprised Emma, despite his physical limitations. Her brother saw the world with an artist's clarity. Maybe this Daniel Hayes needs someone real in his life, even if he doesn't know it yet. Entering a different world, the limousine that picked up Emma felt like a spaceship transporting her to another planet. Daniel sat beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his usual intensity softened by what might have been nervousness. The city lights blurred past the window as they rode through Manhattan, toward the museum. "Remember, you don't need to pretend to be anyone else," Daniel said quietly. "Just be yourself. That's what I'm paying for." Emma nodded, though his words still carried that sting of being chosen for her authenticity rather than her appeal. She reminded herself this was business, nothing more. $50,000 for one evening of playing a role. The Metropolitan Museum transformation. The Metropolitan Museum after hours was transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests dressed in designer gowns and expensive suits. Servers moved through the crowd, offering champagne and delicate Appetizers that probably cost more than Emma's weekly groceries. Daniel guided her through the crowd with practiced ease, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. Emma was surprised by how natural it felt, how his presence seemed to shield her from the curious stares of other guests. They moved past priceless artwork and carefully arranged floral displays, heading toward the main reception area. Daniel Hayes, there you are. A distinguished older man approached them with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. I was beginning to think you might skip this year's gala. Robert, good to see you. Daniel's response was polished, but cool. This is Emma Rodriguez. Emma. Robert Patterson from Patterson Industries. Emma shook hands with the older man, noting how his gaze assessed her with the precision of someone cataloging her worth. Charming to meet you, Miss Rodriguez. Are you in the tech industry as well? Community development, Emma replied, finding her voice steadier than she expected. I coordinate therapeutic gardens for underserved neighborhoods. The first Testerbert's eyebrows rose slightly. How noble. That must be quite fulfilling work, even if it doesn't pay particularly well. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks at the subtle condescension, but Daniel stepped closer to her side. Emma's work helps people heal from trauma and build stronger communities. I can't think of more important work than that. The exchange was brief, but Emma caught the dynamic immediately. This world operated on careful hierarchies and subtle competitions. Everyone was constantly being evaluated and ranked according to wealth, influence, and social connections as they moved through the crowd. Daniel introduced her to politicians, business leaders, and society figures whose names she recognized from news broadcasts. Each interaction followed a similar pattern: polite interest, subtle assessment, barely concealed surprise at her background. You're handling this beautifully, Daniel murmured during a brief moment when they found themselves alone near a display of medieval armor. I'm trying not to think about how much money is in this room, Emma replied, or how out of place I am. You belong here as much as anyone else, more than some. The ex-fiancée appears. Emma felt the change in Daniel's posture before she saw what had caused it. Across the reception hall, a woman moved through the crowd like royalty holding court. Natasha Pemberton was everything Emma was not. Tall, blonde, elegant in a way that spoke of generations of good breeding and better resources. Her silver gown caught the light with every step, and her smile was perfectly calibrated for the cameras that followed her progress. There she is, Daniel said quietly. The reason we're here. Emma watched Natasha's approach, noting how other guests seemed to orbit around her like planets around a particularly bright star. This was her world, her natural habitat, and everyone present acknowledged her position at its center. Daniel, what a lovely surprise. Natasha's voice carried the kind of cultivated warmth that came from years of society events. I wasn't certain you would attend this year. Wouldn't miss it, Daniel replied with careful neutrality. Natasha, this is Emma Rodriguez. Emma Natasha Pemberton. Natasha's blue eyes took in every detail of Emma's appearance with the precision of a jeweler examining a stone. Rodriguez? That name sounds familiar somehow. Have we met before? I don't believe so, Emma replied, though something in Natasha's tone suggested this was more than idle curiosity. The subtle attack begins well. It's wonderful that Daniel has found someone to accompany him this evening, Natasha continued, her smile remaining bright while her words carried subtle barbs. These events can be quite overwhelming for those not accustomed to them. Emma felt the insult delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in concern that made it difficult to address directly. The museum is beautiful. The art collection is extraordinary. Yes, my family has been supporting the museum for generations. We've donated several pieces in the Renaissance wing. Natasha's hand gestured gracefully toward the galleries.
I'll do.
You have much experience with classical art, Emma? The question was designed to expose Emma's limitations, to highlight the differences between them. Emma felt Daniel's tension beside her, saw his jaw tighten as he recognized the attack beginning.
Nice.
I appreciate beauty in all its forms, Emma replied calmly, though I admit I'm more familiar with the art that grows from soil than hangs on walls. A moment of connection as Natasha moved away to greet other guests. Daniel turned to Emma with something that looked like admiration in his green eyes. That was perfectly handled. Was it? I felt like I was being interviewed for a position one wasn't qualified for. You were being tested by someone who's never had to prove her worth through anything other than her family name, Daniel said quietly. And you passed with dignity intact. The orchestra began playing, and couples moved toward the dance floor. Daniel extended his hand to Emma with an expression that mixed determination with something that might have been vulnerability. Would you dance with me? Emma's heart performed. An interesting acceleration. I should warn you that my experience consists mainly of quinceañera parties and community center events. I suspect you're more graceful than you give yourself credit for. The dance that changed everything on the dance floor. Surrounded by couples who moved with practiced elegance, Emma discovered that dancing with Daniel felt surprisingly natural. His hand at her waist was warm and sure, his lead confident enough to make her feel graceful despite her nerves. You're full of surprises, Emma said, looking up into eyes that seemed focused entirely on her face. My mother insisted on dancing lessons when I was 12, said it was essential for building confidence and learning to lead properly. Daniel's voice carried warmth when he mentioned his parents. I complained constantly, but now I'm grateful. She made me learn. They moved together in comfortable rhythm, and Emma became aware of how perfectly they fit together. Her height allowed her to follow his lead naturally, while his strength made her feel both graceful and protected. Emma, Daniel's voice was lower now, more intimate. Thank you for tonight, for being exactly who you are instead of trying to be someone else. Emma felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with their business arrangement and everything to do with the way Daniel was looking at her. The music, the lights, the elegant setting, all seemed to fade until there was only this moment. This man, this unexpected connection, the evening's true beginning. As the song ended, Emma realized that their business arrangement had already become something more complicated. The money, the favor, the carefully constructed evening of proving a point to his ex-fiancée. All of that seemed secondary to the warmth spreading through her system every time Daniel smiled. The night is young, Daniel said, still holding her close as the next song began. Are you ready for whatever comes next? Emma looked around the museum filled with priceless art and powerful people, then back at the man whose green eyes seemed to see her more clearly than anyone ever had. Ready, she said, and meant it. The real evening was just beginning. And Emma Rodriguez was about to discover that sometimes the most authentic connections happen in the most artificial settings. The girl who grew things from soil was about to bloom in ways she had never imagined possible. 6 months later, the wedding invitation arrived on expensive cream cardstock, the kind that announced its importance before a single word was read. Emma held it in her soil-stained hands, having just finished planting winter vegetables in the community garden. The formal script spelled out what she had been dreading. Natasha Pemberton's wedding to Benjamin Cross at the plaza. Hotel. Daniel found her sitting on the wooden bench she had built beside her greenhouse, staring at the invitation as if it might transform into something less threatening. 6 months had passed since the museum gala. 6 months of careful friendship that danced around feelings neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge directly. She sent you an invitation too, Daniel said, settling beside her with his own cream envelope. I suppose she wants an audience for her triumph. Emma had grown comfortable with Daniel's presence in her world. He visited the community garden, regularly rolling up his sleeves to help with planting and maintenance. The other volunteers had stopped staring when the billionaire showed up in jeans and work boots. Though Mrs. Chen still made extra sandwiches whenever she saw his car in the parking lot. The unexpected. Quest, I have another proposition for you, Daniel said, his voice carrying the same careful tone he had used 6 months earlier. $50,000 to attend Natasha's wedding as my date. Emma looked up from the invitation, noting the tension in his shoulders that appeared whenever Natasha's name was mentioned. You want to prove you've moved on by bringing the same fake girlfriend to another social event? The words came out sharper than Emma intended, revealing feelings she had been trying to keep buried. 6 months of friendship had made her situation more complicated, not simpler. She cared about Daniel Hayes in ways that went far beyond their original business arrangement. Not fake, Daniel said quietly. Not anymore. The admission hung between them like something fragile and precious. Emma felt her heart perform complicated. gymnastics while she tried to process what he might mean. Carlos's worsening condition before Emma could respond. Her phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Amanda Wells. Carlos's condition had worsened over the past month, and the experimental treatment they had tried with Daniel's first payment had shown limited results. The new therapy program would cost significantly more, money that Emma simply did not have. "Miss Rodriguez, I wanted to discuss Carlos's treatment options," Dr. Wells said when Emma answered. "The next phase of therapy is available, but the insurance company is questioning the necessity of continued treatment." Emma felt familiar panic rising in her chest. Carlos had shown small improvements with the initial therapy, gaining slightly better control over his motor functions. His artwork had become more detailed, more expressive, but the progress was fragile, requiring ongoing support that their insurance company viewed as unnecessary expense. After hanging up, Emma sat in silence, weighing her options. The $50,000 would cover Carlos's treatment and buy them time to find a more permanent solution. The decision to return, yes, Emma said finally. "I'll go to the wedding with you." Daniel studied her face with the perceptive attention that had become familiar over their months of friendship. "This isn't just about the money anymore, is it?" Emma met his gaze directly. "No, it's about finishing what we started. It's about my brother needing continued treatment that $50,000 will provide." "Emma, I want you to know that regardless of what happens at this wedding, I will make sure Carlos gets the care he needs. The money isn't contingent on anything other than your willingness to face this situation with me." The generosity in his offer took Emma's breath away. Over the past 6 months, she had watched Daniel interact with Carlos, seen the genuine friendship that had developed between them. Daniel had commissioned several of Carlos's paintings for his office, paying prices that reflected the art's value rather than charity. Preparing for battle the week before the wedding was passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like arming for battle than getting ready for celebration. Emma found a dress at a consignment shop, a deep blue gown that complemented her coloring without breaking her budget. She refused to let Daniel pay for her attire this time, needing to maintain some independence in their increasingly complicated relationship. Carlos helped her practice walking in heels, his artistic eye providing feedback on her posture and movement. Despite his physical limitations, he had an innate sense of grace that he shared freely with his sister. "You're nervous about more than just the wedding," Carlos observed, as Emma practiced her acceptance speech in their living room. "You're scared about what this means with Daniel." Emma sank into the chair across from her brother, grateful for his perceptive clarity. 6 months ago, this was just business. But now, I don't know what it is. "Maybe it's time to find out," Carlos suggested gently. "Maybe this wedding is your chance to discover what's real between you." The Plaza Hotel grandeur, the Plaza Hotel ballroom, was transformed into something from a fairy tale. If fairy tales were written by people who understood the language of unlimited wealth, white roses and gold accents created an atmosphere of elegant perfection, while guests moved through the space in designer gowns and custom tuxedos that represented more money than Emma had ever imagined. Daniel appeared at her side as they entered the reception area, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. But Emma caught the tension in his jaw, the careful way he surveyed the room as if preparing for battle. "Remember, you belong here," Daniel said quietly as they moved through the receiving line. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Emma nodded, though she was already feeling the familiar sensation of being catalogued and assessed by every gaze that fell upon her. These people had spent 6 months wondering about Daniel's mysterious companion from the museum gala, and now they had another opportunity to examine her up close. The bride's calculated cruelty. Natasha looked radiant in her designer wedding gown, a masterpiece of beaded silk that caught the light with every movement. She greeted guests with practiced warmth, but Emma noted how her blue eyes sharpened when they landed on Daniel and his companion. "Daniel, how wonderful that you could make it," Natasha said, her voice carrying artificial sweetness. "And Emma, what a surprise to see you again. I was beginning to think you were just a figment of Daniel's imagination." The insult was delivered with surgical precision. It's designed to suggest that Emma's presence in Daniel's life was temporary and probably fictional. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to smile politely. Congratulations on your wedding, Natasha. The ceremony was beautiful. Thank you. Though I must say, I'm curious about your background, Emma. Your name continues to sound familiar, and it finally came to me where I might have heard it before. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. Beside her, Daniel's tension was palpable, as if he sensed approaching danger. The truth about Rosa Martinez Rodriguez, Natasha continued, tilting her head with false concern. Didn't my family once employ a housekeeper named Rosa Rodriguez? This would have been, 15 years ago or so. Emma felt the world tilt around her. Rosa Martinez had been her mother's maiden name, the name she had used when working for wealthy families before her marriage. Emma had been 11 years old when her mother was fired from the Pemberton household under circumstances that had never been fully explained. Rosa Martinez was my mother, Emma said quietly, voice steady despite the storm building in her chest. Natasha's smile sharpened with cruel satisfaction. Of course she was. I remember now. Such an unfortunate situation. Rosa was caught stealing jewelry from my mother's collection, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. The accusation hit Emma like a physical blow. Her mother had never spoken about why she left the Pemberton household, only that sometimes people with money believed it gave them the right to treat others poorly. Now Emma understood the deeper pain her mother had carried. Emma's moment of truth, the reception continued around them. But Emma felt as if she was standing in the eye of a storm. Guests were beginning to notice the tension, conversations quieting. As people turned to observe the drama unfolding between the bride and Daniel's companion, "My mother was not a thief," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the nearby conversations. "Of course you would say that," Natasha replied with practiced sympathy. "Family loyalty is admirable, even when it's misplaced." The incident quite clearly. The necklace was found in Rosa's purse during the search. Emma felt Daniel's support like a physical presence beside her, his hand finding hers in a gesture of solidarity that helped steady her spinning world. Around them, the elegant reception continued, but Emma knew that whatever happened next would define not just her relationship with Daniel, but her own sense of who she was in the world. "Tell me about this search," Emma said calmly, though her heart was racing. "Tell me exactly how my mother, who had worked for your family for 8 months without incident, suddenly decided to steal a necklace." Natasha's confident expression flickered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "I hardly think this is the appropriate venue for discussing ancient history, Emma. This is my wedding day." "The power of truth, no," Emma said, stepping forward slightly. "I think this is exactly the right venue, because you've just accused my deceased mother of theft in front of 300 witnesses, and I deserve the right to defend her memory." The ballroom had grown noticeably quieter, guests turning to witness this unexpected confrontation between the bride and the woman who had somehow infiltrated their exclusive world. "My mother worked 2 jobs to support our family after my father died," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "She cleaned houses for wealthy families because it paid better than her other options, and she took pride in her work. She would never have stolen anything, especially not from employers she respected." Natasha's blue eyes had grown cold, but she maintained her perfect posture. "Emma, dear, I understand this is difficult for you to accept, but the evidence was." "Quite clear what evidence," Emma pressed, "because I remember my mother coming home that night, crying in ways I had never seen before. She wouldn't tell me what happened, only that sometimes people with power use it to hurt those who can't fight back." Daniel's support Daniel stepped closer to Emma, his presence providing the strength she needed to continue. "Emma," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this here." "Yes, I do," Emma replied, meeting Natasha's gaze directly. "Because my mother spent the last 15 years of her life carrying the weight of an accusation that destroyed her reputation. She never got the chance to defend herself publicly, but I can defend her memory." Emma looked around the ballroom, seeing rapt attention on faces that represented the pinnacle of New York society. These were people who understood power, influence, and the careful maintenance of reputation. "I want everyone here to know that Rosa Martinez Rodriguez was a woman of integrity who raised 2 children alone while working multiple jobs. She taught us that character is revealed not in what we own, but in how we treat others, especially those who cannot fight back." The confrontation escalates. Natasha's composure began to crack as Emma's words gained power. This is hardly appropriate. Dinner conversation, Emma? Perhaps we should discuss this privately if you feel the need to relitigate ancient history. Ancient history? Emma's voice carried new strength. My mother's reputation was destroyed by accusations she never had the chance to address. She spent 15 years believing that people thought she was a thief, and it broke something in her that never fully healed. Benjamin Cross appeared at Natasha's side, his expression darkening as he assessed the situation. As the groom and a powerful real estate mogul, he clearly did not appreciate drama at his wedding reception. Is there a problem here? Benjamin asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to resolving conflicts through intimidation. No problem, Emma said calmly. Just a discussion about the importance of truth and the courage it takes to admit. When we've made mistakes that hurt innocent people, the wedding's true revelation, Judge Patricia Whitman, Natasha's mother, approached with the regal bearing of someone who had spent decades at the center of New York society. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her designer gown impeccable, but Emma caught something uncomfortable in her expression. Natasha, dear, perhaps we should move this conversation elsewhere. Judge Whitman suggested, her voice carrying the authority of both her judicial position and her social standing. But Emma was not finished. 6 months of friendship with Daniel had taught her about the power dynamics of this world, about how truth could be buried under layers of influence and carefully constructed narratives. Judge Whitman, Emma said respectfully but firmly, would like to know what evidence convinced your family that my mother was guilty of theft. The older woman's composure faltered slightly. Around them, the reception had ground to a virtual halt as guests strained to hear this unexpected drama playing out at the most social event of the season. My dear, this is hardly the time or place, Judge Whitman began, but Emma interrupted, gently. With respect, Your Honor, my mother is not here to defend herself. She died 2 years ago, still carrying the shame of accusations she never understood. If there was evidence of her guilt, I deserved to see it. If there wasn't, then her memory deserves vindication. The dam breaks. The silence that followed Emma's words was deafening. 300 guests stood frozen, processing what they were witnessing. A young woman with dirt under her fingernails, and integrity in her voice. Challenging some of the most powerful people in the city to justify their treatment of her mother. Finally, Judge Whitman spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no evidence, Emma. The necklace was never missing. The admission hit the ballroom like a thunderclap. Natasha's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, while Benjamin's expression darkened with fury at this public revelation. What? Do you mean it was never missing? Daniel asked, his voice carrying sharp attention. Judge Whitman looked around the ballroom at faces she had known for decades, people whose respect and approval had defined her social position. Natasha had borrowed the necklace without permission for a party at school. When it was discovered missing, she panicked and suggested that Rosa might have taken it. We searched Rosa's belongings and found nothing, but by then the damage was done. Suspicion had been cast, and we made a terrible mistake in letting her go without a proper explanation. Justice finally served. The revelation swept through the ballroom like wildfire. Emma felt vindication rushing through her system, sweet and bitter simultaneously. Her mother's memory was finally cleared, but the cost had been 15 years of undeserved shame. So my mother lost her job, her reputation, and her faith in the fairness of the world because a teenager was afraid to admit she had borrowed something without permission. Emma's voice remained steady, but tears gathered in her eyes. Natasha finally found her voice, though it had lost all of its earlier confidence. It was a misunderstanding. I was young and frightened. I never meant for it to go so far. But it did go that far, Emma replied. And my mother paid the price for your cowardice. She worked 3 jobs to support our family, because no other wealthy household would hire her after word spread about the supposed theft. The reception had become a courtroom, with Emma serving as prosecutor, judge, and jury all at once. The guests who had gathered to celebrate Natasha's triumph were witnessing her public humiliation instead. Daniel's declaration. Daniel stepped forward, his hand finding Emma's and holding it firmly. Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone here to understand something clearly. Emma Rodriguez is the most authentic person in this room. She has spent the last 15 minutes defending her mother's memory with more grace and dignity than most of us show in our entire lives. His voice carried clearly through the silent ballroom. She creates therapeutic gardens that help people heal from trauma. She has sacrificed her own comfort to care for her brother. She represents everything that is good and real in a world that often values appearance over substance. Emma felt her heart swell with something that transcended gratitude. This was not the calculated partnership they had begun with, but something deeper and more authentic. The evening's true victory as they prepared to leave the reception. Emma felt a sense of closure she had not expected. Her mother's memory was vindicated. Natasha's carefully constructed facade had cracked, and she had discovered that her feelings for Daniel were entirely mutual. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said as they walked toward the hotel exit. "What you did tonight took extraordinary courage." "I did it for my mother," Emma replied, "but also for everyone who has ever been powerless in the face of wealth and influence."
You
were not powerless tonight. You were magnificent." As they stepped into the cool evening air, Emma realized that their story was just beginning. The girl who grew things from soil had found the strength to bloom in the most unlikely garden of all. The morning after Rima woke in her small apartment, to sunlight streaming through windows she had forgotten to cover, and the scent of coffee that Carlos was brewing in their tiny kitchen. The events of the previous evening felt like a dream, too dramatic and significant to have actually happened. But the deep blue dress hanging on her closet door and the lingering sensation of Daniel's hand in hers confirmed that every moment had been real. Carlos appeared in her doorway. With 2 mugs of coffee, moving more easily than he had in weeks, the continued therapy sessions had been helping, small improvements that filled Emma with hope for his future. "So," Carlos said, settling into the chair beside her bed with careful grace, "how does it feel to be the woman who brought down New York society's golden couple?" Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth to center herself after a night of restless sleep. "I didn't bring them down. I just told the truth about what they did to our mother." Emma, by now half of New York, knows that Natasha Pemberton built her perfect reputation on lies that destroyed an innocent woman's life. The other half will know by lunchtime. The media storm begins as if summoned by Carlos's words. Emma's phone began ringing with unknown numbers. Social media notifications chimed constantly, and when she cautiously checked her messages, she found hundreds of friend requests and comments from people she had never met. The story had spread beyond the wedding reception. Guests had shared details on social media, and by morning, news outlets were picking up the narrative of the housekeeper's daughter, who had publicly vindicated her mother's memory at high society's most exclusive event. "Miss Rodriguez, this is Thomas Rivera from the New York Herald. I'd like to speak with you about last night's events at the Pemberton Cross wedding." Emma declined the interview, but the calls kept coming. Television producers, magazine writers, podcast hosts, all wanting to hear her story firsthand. The attention felt overwhelming and invasive. Turning her private family tragedy into public entertainment, Daniel's morning visit, a soft knock at her door, interrupted the constant ringing. Emma opened it to find Daniel standing on her front step with pastries from the bakery she liked, and an expression that mixed concern with something deeper. "I brought breakfast and moral support," he said, holding up the bag. "I figured you might need both today." Inside her kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of her real life, Daniel looked different than he had at the hotel. More relaxed, more authentic, more like the man who had been visiting her garden for months, rather than the polished businessman who navigated high society events. How are you handling all of this?" Daniel asked, noting the constantly ringing phone. "I'm not sure yet. Part of me feels vindicated for my mother, but another part feels like I've opened a door I don't know how to close." Carlos joined them at the kitchen table, and Emma watched the easy friendship that had developed between the two men over the past months. Daniel treated her brother with respect and genuine interest, never making Carlos feel like a burden or a charity case. Margaret Foster's unexpected support, the doorbell rang. and Emma opened it to find an elderly woman she recognized from the wedding reception. Margaret Foster had been seated at a table near the dance floor, and Emma remembered her applauding when the truth about Rosa Martinez was revealed. "Miss Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced. Foster and I wanted to speak with you about last night's events." Mrs. Foster entered with the dignity of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever she went, but her manner was warm rather than imperious. She accepted Emma's offer of tea and settled at the kitchen table as if she belonged there. "My dear, what you did last night was extraordinary. I've known the Pemberton family for 30 years, and I've watched them use their influence to avoid consequences for their actions more times than I can count." Emma studied the older woman's face, noting genuine respect in her expression. "Just wanted people to know the truth about my mother." "Truth is a rare commodity in the circles we move in," Mrs. Foster replied. "Most of us become so focused on maintaining appearances that we forget the difference between reputation and character." "The offer of alliance, Mrs." Foster reached into her handbag and pulled out a business card printed on heavy stock. Served on the board of several charitable organizations, including one that provides legal aid to domestic workers who have been wrongfully terminated or accused of misconduct. Emma felt her pulse quicken with interest. Legal aid for situations like my mother's exactly. Rosa's case was not unique, unfortunately. Wealthy families sometimes find it easier to blame their staff for problems rather than address their own failings. We help workers defend themselves and, when possible, clear their names posthumously. The older woman's offer represented something. Emma had never considered the possibility of turning her mother's tragedy into protection for other vulnerable workers. "There's something else," Mrs. Foster continued. "Several of us who witnessed last night's events are prepared to make substantial donations to your community garden project. We believe therapeutic green spaces serve an important function in helping people heal from trauma." Daniel's business proposal. After Mrs. Foster left, Daniel turned to Emma with an expression that mixed professional interest with personal investment. "I have a proposition for you, but this time it's not about accompanying me to social events." Felt her heart rate increase, though she wasn't sure whether from anticipation or anxiety. "What kind of proposition?" "I want to fund a foundation that creates and maintains therapeutic gardens in underserved communities throughout the city. Full funding, professional staff, ongoing maintenance, everything needed to make these spaces sustainable and effective." The offer took Emma's breath away. "That would cost millions of dollars. I have millions of dollars. What I don't have is expertise in creating spaces that actually help people heal." "That's what you bring to the partnership." Carlos looked up from his engineering sketches with obvious excitement. "Emma, this could help thousands of people. You could create healing spaces in every borough." The personal conversation after Carlos returned to his room to rest. Emma and Daniel found themselves alone in her small living room. The space felt intimate in a way that the hotel ballrooms and museum halls had not. More conducive to honest conversation about feelings they had both been avoiding. "Daniel, I need to ask you something directly," Emma said, settling onto her second-hand sofa beside him.
"Oh."
"What is this really about? The foundation? The continued support? All of it?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his attention focused on her, faced with an intensity that made her heart race. "It's about the fact that I've spent 6 months falling in love with you and trying to convince myself it was just friendship." The admission hung between them like something precious and fragile. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally hearing him voice what she had been feeling for months. "I was afraid to hope," Emma said quietly. "You could have anyone, any woman from your world who understood the rules and expectations. I don't want anyone from my world. I want you exactly as you are, creating beautiful things and fighting for justice and taking care of your family with more grace than I've ever seen anyone display." The first real kiss. Daniel moved closer on the sofa, his hand reaching up to cup Emma's face gently. "Emma Rodriguez, would you like to try being my girlfriend for real this time? No business arrangement, no payment, just two people who care about each other, seeing what might be possible?" Emma's answer was lost in their first kiss, soft and sweet and full of possibility. 6 months of careful friendship transformed into something deeper and more authentic, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than social convenience. When they finally broke apart, Emma felt like she was breathing clearly for the first time in months. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "I would like that very much." Planning the future over the following weeks, Emma and Daniel began building something together that went far beyond romance. The foundation they created would eventually fund therapeutic gardens in 25 locations throughout New York City, providing healing spaces for trauma survivors, veterans, children with disabilities, and anyone else who needed the peace that growing things could provide. Carlos thrived. With continued access to treatment, his artistic abilities expanding as his motor control improved, he was accepted into an art therapy program at a local college, where his work began attracting attention from galleries and collectors, who appreciated both his technical skill and emotional depth. The legal aid organization that Mrs. Foster had introduced helped Emma research other cases similar to her mother's situation. They discovered a pattern of domestic workers being wrongfully accused and terminated without proper investigation, leading to a class action lawsuit that would eventually result in policy changes, protecting household employees' rights. The real wedding 1 year later, Emma stood in the same community garden where Daniel had first approached her with his desperate proposition. The space had been transformed for their wedding ceremony. It's filled with friends and family who had watched their love story develop from business arrangement to authentic partnership. Judge Patricia Whitman seeking to make amends for her family's treatment of Rosa Martinez had offered to officiate the ceremony. Her participation felt like a full-circle moment, bringing justice and healing to a story that had begun with injustice and pain. Carlos walked Emma down the aisle with pride and joy written across his features. His artwork now hung in galleries throughout the city, and his story of overcoming physical challenges through artistic expression inspired other young people facing similar struggles. Mrs. Foster served as Emma's matron of honor, having become a surrogate grandmother to both Emma and Carlos over the months of working together on the foundation. Her presence represented the possibility of redemption and genuine change. Even among people who had previously prioritized social status over human decency, the vows that mattered when Daniel and Emma exchanged vows. Their words reflected the journey they had taken from strangers to partners to deeply committed lovers. Emma promised to continue growing beautiful things, both in gardens and in their life together. Daniel promised to stand beside her in all future battles for justice and truth. "Emma Rodriguez," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the garden filled with people who genuinely loved them. "You taught me that authenticity is more valuable than acceptance, that dignity cannot be purchased, and that love grows strongest when it's rooted in respect for who someone really is." Emma's response brought tears to eyes throughout the garden. "Daniel Hayes, you showed me that partnership means standing together in the face of adversity, that wealth means nothing without integrity, and that sometimes the most artificial situations can lead to the most authentic connections." The happy beginning, as they danced to music provided by a string quartet from the community center, Emma looked around at the celebration that surrounded them. This was not the elaborate society wedding that Natasha had thrown, but something more meaningful, a gathering of people who had supported them through challenges and celebrated their triumphs. Their foundation had already broken ground on 5 new therapeutic gardens, with more planned throughout the city. Carlos was thriving in his art program and had been commissioned to create a memorial piece honoring domestic workers who had faced injustice. Mrs. Foster had become family, and Judge Whitman was slowly earning forgiveness through concrete actions that supported vulnerable workers' rights. "No regrets about missing the society wedding experience?" Daniel asked as they swayed together under lights strung between the garden's fruit trees. Emma looked around at their friends and family, at the space where she had spent years nurturing growing things, at the man who had chosen to love her for exactly who she was, rather than trying to change her into someone else. "This is perfect," she said, and meant it completely. The girl who grew things from soil had found her place not in Daniel's world or her own, but in the new world they had created together. Love had indeed conquered all, but more importantly, Truth and authenticity had triumphed over pretense and social climbing. Their story was just beginning. Rooted in mutual respect and ready to bloom into whatever adventures awaited them next.